All right, before we start jelly printing, I'm going to share with you what I have here, what I'm using. So I have two 5x7 gel plates here. I have them on top of acrylic blocks just so that I can move the inks around without, it would be a lot easier, or it's a lot easier on the block than doing it like this. Sometimes I want the colors to blend into each other, and this just helps it do that a little bit more. This one here is stained from using different colored alcohol inks on it. I'd used some greens and stuff like that. It doesn't affect the jelly printing of it at all. So it's just going to affect how you see the colors, but it's going to work the same. You could also use an 8x10 jelly plate. What I'm printing on is printer paper. This I've cut down in half and they fit perfectly. They're just a little bit bigger than the 5x7 jelly prints or jelly plates. If you choose to use an 8x10, an 8.5x11 printer paper is the perfect size to go on top of that. I like to print on printer paper because no matter how hard you try, you're not going to love every single print. So by using printer paper, it's really inexpensive and you can create a lot of prints without having to worry about using up expensive cardstock. I'm also using alcohol inks that I have put in little bottles. I have 1/3 of the alcohol ink color, and then I put 2/3 of 99% isopropyl alcohol. I'm using 4 different colors here, and I'll list them on the supply sheet. The reason I do it this way is so that the colors are a little bit lighter. You could use it straight from the bottle as is, and then you could add just some clear isopropyl to thin out what you want. I like it this way because it just saves a bit of a step. I can still thin some out if I want to, but I don't necessarily need to. So I typically start with the lightest color. And I'm going to do it on both plates. I just squeeze it out, trying to cover the whole plate. But even if I don't, I do lift the plate up and help the ink to move around. Oops, I forgot to get it on that one. And I tried not to use more of the darker colors than I have used of the lighter colors because I don't necessarily want to overwhelm my print. So I'm just trying to make sure it covers the surface. It doesn't need to cover it 100%. I see I've got some open spots there. That's totally fine. What we're going to get there is the color of the paint that we're jelly printing with. And if by chance you look at it and you want a little bit more, say this one here needs a little bit more purple, just a few more drops, I can leave them as is, which I'm going to do for this case, or I could blend it out a little bit more. This one here, I'm just going to fill in those empty spots with some of the light color. So I'm using 2 plates here, and I'm going to get 2 prints. And what I plan on doing is showing you throughout the class. I'll do the similar technique, but I'll just change it up a little bit so you can see how it works with 2 different, just a slight modification. So I've got the ink on here. I need to let it completely dry before we pull the print. I'm going to be using a vintage white paint. This is a satin finished acrylic paint. You could also use white or gray. I like to use a light color because alcohol inks are transparent and you're going to see what paint you use underneath it. So if you use a black, you're not going to see your alcohol inks very well. So a lighter color is going to show off those colors more. And I like using the vintage white just because it has a bit of a warmer feel, but it looks beautiful with the white or the gray as well. So it's personal preference. All right, so our alcohol ink is dry. It probably takes about 5 to 10 minutes, mainly because I put a lot of ink on there because I wanted to make sure that the plate was covered as much as possible. I have a 6-inch brayer here, and off to the side I have just some scratch paper. So when I am done putting my paint on my jelly plate, I can brush the excess off of the plate or on the scratch paper to my side. So I'm going to put some paint on the plate. And we really only need a thin layer, so I do want to see a little bit of that alcohol ink below it. If you do too little, the paint will dry too quickly. And I'm just going to move this to the side so I'm not the paint will dry too quickly and it'll start to dry on your brayer and pull it up. So it does take a little bit to get used to how much paint, but basically I want to be able to see the alcohol ink through it. Once I've got my paper on there, I'm going to just rub my hands all over it, making sure that that paint has good contact with the paper, because if the paint doesn't touch the paper, you're not going to get a pull in that area. So you want to make sure that everything is completely covered, and then we pull. So that paint is still a little bit wet, so you do need to set it aside to dry. But take a look at how those are exactly the same colors, but they're completely different. Other than the colors, there's nothing similar about them. There was a little bit of metallic from a print that I pulled before left on the plate. I typically leave that stuff on there simply because it makes the print more interesting in what comes up. So I'm gonna do the same thing again, but this time, once the paint is dry, I'm gonna tweak it a little bit before putting the paint on it and doing a pull. So all right, so our alcohol inks are mostly dry. Because of what we're going to do next, I don't need to necessarily wait till they're completely dry. So the way we're going to change this background is we're going to use just some plain isopropyl alcohol to make that alcohol ink move. So if I do a spray bottle, I get that look. If I use a dropper bottle, I get that look. And the way alcohol ink works is it pushes everything away. So it's just a fun way to get some texture in your background with very little effort. Now I do need to wait for this to completely dry. So this bottom part here is just using the splatter brush. So now I need to wait for it to dry again until it's 100%, and then we're going to pull the print. All right, the inks have dried. Let's pull the prints. Now in the last section I told you I had a 6-inch brayer here. You don't need to have a 6-inch brayer. You could have just a smaller one, that will work as well. I just like using the bigger one simply because then I don't have any possible paint lines from the edges of my brayer. But you definitely don't necessarily need to have a bigger one, especially if you're just starting out and you're just playing around. All right, once again, make sure that you have good contact between the plate and your paper, and then pull the print. See what that isopropyl did to that backing there? So it just gives you so many more possibilities for just texture in your background. So we're going to do one more super quick. So in the last one, I was squeezing my ink all over the place, but you could also do like an ombre effect. So I'm just going to let that completely dry, and then for this one, let's do kind of a frame. You don't have to do it this way, it's just to show you what happens if you do. Just give you ideas. And now we'll let them completely dry, and then we'll pull the prints. All right, the inks are dry, let's pull the prints. So the inks did flow or move as they do when they were sitting on the plate, but just another fun way to create a different print.